Welcome to our class, and I think we're pretty much all here. And let me just start off with the obvious question. What exactly is an out-of-body experience?
That's a good place to start at the beginning. So the out-of-body experience is basically where you perceive yourself and you're perceiving through a vehicle of consciousness that is something other than your physical body. So you're aware your consciousness is not perceiving through the five senses, and it's perceiving through another vehicle of consciousness. You might, for example, look down and see your hands, or you see your body, but it's not your physical body. It's an energy version of your body. So that's the idea, is that you're perceiving yourself outside of the usual framework of your physical consciousness. And the consciousness that you know yourself to be is present outside of the physical body. That's the perception of it, yes.
Okay. So my second question, I gave Tom some of these questions already. So that's an interest. I liked your explanation very much because it shows that when you're out of body, you're not out of any body. You have a different kind of body. You're using different senses. What Seth calls the inner senses.
Correct.
And so it's not like you're, I don't know, I was trying to find a bodily or something.
Well, there's gradations of consciousness, and at what you might call, I hate to use the word, but at the lower levels of energy realms, you would perceive yourself more form-based. So it's like you would perceive still form consciousness. So a lot of the lower realms, I don't mean lower as in like a judgment or even as, dark versus light, but at a vibrational frequency closer to the physical realm, things are going to look very physical. So you might perceive your energy body to be almost quite dense and quite physical. And then as you go up in the gradations of consciousness to more and more refined realms, the forms give way to formlessness. So there are states of consciousness where you do perceive yourself outside of your body, but without a body, and you're perceiving more of a 360 perceptual field, but you don't perceive that you actually have a vehicle of consciousness because you're in a non-form-based reality.
That's great. I guess my two next questions go together. One is, what sparked your interest in OBEs, and what was your first experience?
Yeah, so I've always had an interest in spiritual matters. And for me, growing up was very tumultuous because I had a hard time figuring out how to match right livelihood with my spiritual interests. And eventually I worked that out, but the first experience that I've had was quite spontaneous. And to tell you the truth, it really just brought me to insane states of fear because I didn't know what was happening. Like, I had spiritual interest, but I didn't actually quite recognize what was happening just yet. Later down the line, I started to do a lot of research because I have that interest in spirituality, so I'm just constantly diving deeper into these matters. And I started to make connections. Like, I would have experiences that I previously labeled as sleep paralysis, and it's that experience where you kind of come to consciousness, but you realize you can't move your physical body, and that can be incredibly frightening. And the ego mind, because it's used to perceiving in a very specified ways through the five senses, it can also go into panic. And kind of the third factor of fear is that oftentimes when you perceive through your non-physical senses, you'll recognize there are other presences around, and that can also be frightening. So you can't move, you feel paralyzed, you're shifted to an alternate state of consciousness, so your mind is in panic mode, survival mode, and then you're perceiving that there's other presences around. So all of these things can be frightening. So those were some of my first experiences, but as I dived into it, I started connecting the dots. It's like there's this idea of sleep paralysis, and more in the Western terms, but then I started realizing that that's a precursor to out-of-body states. And it started to dawn on me, it's like, that's what these strange experiences are. And I started to work with it consciously. And then I started to realize that I can actually project consciously out of the body. And actually it's a precursor, these experiences are precursors to an exhilarating experience rather than something that causes a lot of fear. So,
So how old were you when you first began to have these weird experiences?
oh, I don't know. I know a series of them were triggered when I started Qigong practice. Those weren't at that time necessarily fearful. So that would be, I don't know, 15, 20, no, Qigong started over 20 years ago now.
But you weren't a child.
I, I'm gonna put this around my 20s, that this started happening, like early 20s, were the fearful experiences. Then later during, when I initiated Qigong, they weren't fearful anymore, they were just kind of strange and bizarre. Like I'd be laying in my bed with my covers up to my neck, but then I would like see my hands floating in front of me, and I'd be looking at my hands and I'm like, oh, my hands are see-through. I can see through my hands to the ceiling. But then I'm like, somewhere in my mind, I'm like, but my covers are up to here, so how are my hands even going through the covers? To you know, so they became more like bizarre experiences versus fearful experiences. But then later on down the line, I started investigating more and started connecting the dots of like, wait a minute, I can really do something with this. This is something I can consciously induce and create.
Hmm. So why did you think that you weren't just nuts?
Well, I mean, I knew I was nuts to a point, but there's always a good kind of crazy, right?
Right.
You'll find a lot of the genius on the planet, they're crazy in the right way, you know, you might say, because there's a fine line between craziness and actual genius, or you know, expression of one's talents and gifts.
I guess another way, I obviously you're not nuts, but I guess it could be one of the scary things about having these experiences is you feel alone, and you know no one else knows what you're doing, and you know you feel strange. So one question I have though is, so you've had these experiences, but what would that matter for you know these people in the class? What do your experiences mean for people who, like me, who haven't had these experiences?
Well, first of all, if you're having strange nighttime experiences that lead to terror, you know, this is something to investigate, whether you're starting to shift, your consciousness is starting to separate from the body, and this is something, when consciously understood, it can just greatly bring relief. Like you start to understand what's happening to you, and you, whether you choose to work with it consciously or not, you can at least recognize the phenomena as it is occurring. But more importantly than that, I believe, is if anybody has any interest in wanting to discover what we're truly made of and to penetrate deeper into the interior of the universe, you know, if you're an explorer at heart, you know, even if you're a scientist at heart, I think the basis of science is curiosity and wanting to discover. And so it's that sense of adventure and discovery of wanting to know what's beyond the physical, what's behind the veil, as we colloquially say. You know, to be able to not just peek behind the curtain, but to be able to just fully go into those out of body, non-physical states and really begin to explore a whole new realm that we've, as a society, we've generally been locked away from. Of course, we're the ones who locked ourselves away from that, but the collective consciousness has not been favorable to this kind of exploration. But right now, so this, you could say this is like the last frontier in a way. I mean, we can say it's space, but it is also the interior of the universe. I think at some point we'll actually recognize that space exploration is in fact reflective of the inner exploration of the self. So that's another can of worms. But the idea being that this is about exploration. This is about answering those great questions. Do we survive beyond death? Is death the end? You know, these are questions that have been around in the human psyche for probably as long as humans have been around. And it's the capacity to explore, to figure out firsthand, and to not just take a religious doctrine, or to not just take a scientific doctrine, but to yourself go as the explorer into the great unknown. It's a powerful place to be.
Let me take another tack on this, and I'm going to go back to the gallery view. And if anybody wants to ask a question, remember that this is your opportunity. So my question here is, was there any moment in an out-of-body experience which could validate that this was an actual out-of-body experience? Do you know what I mean? If I would say, well, you had these experiences, but you say you've gone and you've seen. Well, let me give you an example. I was listening to a woman who said that she traveled out of body to visit some friends in Brazil, and she saw that they were having breakfast, and they didn't perceive her. But so she went back to her body and she emailed them and she said, "Oh, I saw you were having breakfast and I saw what you were eating and I saw what you were wearing." And so I thought, wow, that's sort of evidence that what we're talking about here is an actual, veridical, you might say, thing that, it wasn't just a fantasy in your mind. Have you ever had experiences like that?
So first of all, I'm not one of those people that needs to verify it in this kind of a way. I know some people who really excel at that and actually have gone about experimenting these kinds of states. For me, it's more about like how far into the interior of the universe can I go. So my out of bodies have tended to shift away from the physical rather than staying focused on the physical. And I've never really had the intention of like, oh, I need to prove this in some kind of scientific way, because to me it's like the experience is the proof. And if you want to be skeptical, you can deny any evidence, even as we've seen in our society today. It's if you want to not believe something, it's very easy to not believe something regardless of how much evidence is there. So I never really went into that vortex of like trying to prove, is this real, is it not real? Because in a sense it's like, how can I prove that this reality is real? Maybe it's just the projection of electrical impulses in my brain. It's you could argue that the physical isn't real either. It's a brain, it's a brain state.
Right.
So I never went down that tack. And I've had precognitive dreams and things like that where I get premonitions of things, but the out of body state has primarily been exploratory and just going into the interior and exploring and just being curious about whether it's the levity of the non-physical body, or just what is it composed of, how does it feel, and what does the interior of the universe look like, what does the higher self look like, going into those for lack of better words, higher states of consciousness.
Cool. We've been studying near-death experiences in this class. We've been reading a book by a guy named Pim Van Lommel. And he is a scientist, and so he is concerned with demonstrating the veridicality of near-death experiences. And so that's not your concern, but I'm just letting you know that that was something that we read. But the question is, since we have been studying near-death experiences, what's the difference between, or is there a relationship between OBEs and near-death experiences?
Well, there's definitely a relationship, because both include the dissociation or disentanglement of the consciousness from the physical body. With the near-death experience, you're making that final transition, or perhaps perceiving to make the final transition, while then perhaps a choice is made at one level or another that you're going to return to that body. So then you come back with the story to tell about the experience, if you do remember it. However, the out-of-body state is, there's no health condition involved. I mean, you're in good health. It's the ability to consciously leave the physical vehicle, and I even say that because it's a colloquialism, but that's the experience of it. It feels like you're literally leaving your physical body. It's a shift of consciousness, actually. But that's the idea, is that it's the same mechanism, just that one is induced by a health condition, a crisis of whatnot, or the imminent potential of death, and a glimpse of that transition to the other world. Whereas the out-of-body state is you're very much still anchored to the physical body, but having having some emergency thing coming in. But you're still anchored to the body. There's still, what some authors have described it as the silver cord. I've never experienced the silver cord, but it's this sense that you still have a strong attachment to the body. So people sometimes ask, well, what will happen if I can't come back to the body? This is something that goes in line with this kind of questioning. will I get lost out there somewhere? What if, usually the issue is staying out long, and because you tend to get snapped back to the physical body. And so the tendency is to want to push the envelope of how long can I stay out versus having to concern about coming back to the body, because you'll get snapped back to the body sometimes almost instantaneously. And so the trick is really how to stay away from the body, not how to come back. So there's no worry that you're going to somehow get lost in the non-physical and not be able to come back. If the process is in your death experience, the idea is that you're leaving the body, and there's that potential that severing will happen, but that's not going to be the case in a normal out-of-body experience.
So one of the things that we studied in this class that created a lot of interest is the idea of reincarnation. I suspect that people in this class were more interested in reincarnation than in any other topic we've studied. So let me just again ask us the same question I asked before, but instead of about NDEs, I'll ask about reincarnation. So what's the relationship between OBEs and the whole idea of reincarnation?
That's a pretty wide and open-ended question. So the way I tend to see this whole phenomena of other lives is not so much that it's a reincarnation, but rather that there's one, for lack of better terms, you might say oversoul, that has many projections into the time-space reality field. And because the soul and the oversoul exist on a non-physical plane of consciousness, it is not subject to time and space in the way that we are. So because of that perception that exists outside of time, it can project itself into time at any point in time. And so it might project itself backwards into time, or forwards into time, or sideways into parallel time tracks, because it's an infinite field. You have to realize that the universe is infinite, and the definition of infinite means that there can be many versions of events that take place, and there can be many multiple parallel timelines, because the creativity of all that is cannot possibly be contained by one rigidized timeline that we perceive. There's many probable versions of each timeline. And so given all that infinity to work with, and then given that the oversoul exists outside of the time-space reality context, it projects itself simultaneously into multiple lives at the same time, so to speak. So there's not a sense that there's a reincarnation. It's that you have a life experience and you can consider yourself an aspect of the oversoul, and that oversoul might have other aspects either in the same time frame or a parallel time frame or a future or past time frame. And so that would be the other lives, that you're perceiving. You have a connection to another aspect of the oversoul that you are. And so to your physical mind, that might come to seeming as a memory of another life, but it's actually, in a sense, a concurrent parallel life that is happening, even though it might be perceived as past from our vantage point. It is simultaneous to the oversoul's vantage point. So that's how I look at the idea of reincarnation. And the out-of-body experience is how does it relate? That's a really interesting question. So the idea is, when you're exploring, you're still your own aspect self. You have your unique vantage point. So you're exploring as the version of yourself that you are, but you can have more you can have more readily available these so-called memories or the connections to the other aspect selves. So you might find yourself having an affinity to project to a certain time period, because another version of you, another aspect of your oversoul, might be having an incarnation in that time period. So you might have this incredible affinity for, like, let's say, the Roman times. So you find yourself projecting, and you find yourself drawn to these certain areas. And you might even in your physical life be drawn to exploring certain time periods. And that can be indicative that you have another aspect in that time frame, and you're just feeling that natural resonance, that natural affinity to that time period.
So have you had, I'm sure you have, but I'll just ask the question, have you had, say, experiences where you saw some other aspects, some other probable realities For example, you mentioned Roman times or whatever.
So I had this one, for example, this is just the one that floats to my mind, where I perceive myself and my current father, who's passed away since then, but he was alive when I had this experience. And we're on a ship, one of those, ships that sailed from Europe to the Americas. And I perceive him as the captain and me as one of the shipmates. And it's like all of a sudden I had this like resonance identification with that relationship and how it reflects in our current relationship. And it was just all of a sudden it was very insightful, all these like patterns and behaviors. And all of a sudden I just got this glimpse of this other, it's like this kind of subconscious resonance there between me and my father. So it was very insightful. It's hard to even explain how, but it's just like it just shed light on some of the ways that we interacted with one another. So that's one minor example.
You're using a lot of language that is familiar to us because we've read the Seth material.
Right.
So could you talk about when you encountered the Seth material and what effect it had on you?
Right. So about the time that I started Qigong practice, I started reading Seth.
I'm not sure everybody knows what that is.
Qigong? Oh, Qigong?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So it's basically Qigong means energy skill. I mean, Qi, everyone kind of knows that. Gong means skill or work or, the cultivation. So it's the Chinese practice of cultivating one's Qi. So people are probably more familiar with Tai Chi. And Qigong is very much related to that. It's the idea of moving energy through the body through posture, breath, and intention. And it's a series of exercises. You might even colloquially call it Taoist yoga, that can have a reference. So it's the Chinese version of an energy body practice, kind of like Hatha yoga is to the Hindu tradition or the yogic tradition. Okay, so you were doing Qigong and you discovered Seth? Yeah, so basically when I started my Qigong practice, I actually met my Qigong teacher. His name was actually also Seth, so it was this interesting coincidence because I just found the Seth material. And it was, so that was about 20 years ago, 20 plus. And I actually realized that whatever Seth was describing about energy was so much more eloquent than the Qigong books I was reading. And it was really supplemental reading to me because I was opening up through the practices to the awareness of energy. But the best explanation for what was happening to me was the Seth material. And then I realized like it was just kind of a beautiful marriage of this, the philosophy with Seth gives it to you through these very eloquent, mental constructs that helps you to understand it. But then the application for me was the Qigong. So then I had to practice how do I apply this versus just reading about it, because it can be very easy to read the Seth material, but you want to have a way of applying it to a daily life, how do you make it work for you? So Qigong was in part that aspect of connecting the practice to physical action and to implementing it in my life. Okay, that's helpful. So the concept, were you using the concept of oversoul and where Seth might use entity? Right. Yeah, okay. Okay, good. So does Seth talk about out-of-body experiences? Yeah, he does. In the volume, I think it was 6 of the early sessions, he's really started to dive into it. And I kind of almost wished he had a specific place where he talked about OBEs, but it's really sprinkled throughout the material. So it's something that you hear a reference to here and there. He'll have a paragraph here, he'll have a paragraph there. And it would almost be a great project to actually combine all of it into one book. There is an attempt at that, which was Seth Dreams and something about projections of consciousness. Yeah, that book I think was an attempt to put it all together. So yeah, there's a lot of cherry picked quotes in there. But yeah, he definitely talks about it, and but he doesn't like give you, I don't know, he doesn't seem to break it down into like, oh, this is what you're gonna do, and here's the steps. This is what you. So I found that a lot of his after death I'm having a hard time finding my words. His explanations of after-death realms were very applicable to also what you would experience in the out-of-body states.
Could you
But
say it again?
His descriptions of the after-death planes, I think in Seth Speaks, he really starts getting into it, and then in the subsequent books, what you might experience in the non-physical realms. He does have great descriptions of that. He doesn't couch it in terms of this is what you'll experience when you're out of body. It's more he explains this is what you'll experience after you die, basically. So that is very much similar to what you would experience in the out-of-body states. So it's in there. It's just you have to look for it and you have to kind of dig for it. Who explains it much more precisely in a kind of a Western mindset, like, you know, points A, B, C, steps 1, 2, 3, and how to make this happen, is William Buhlman's Adventures Beyond the Body. That's a book that really, it breaks it down into manageable units as far as the practice and how to induce the states, as well as explaining it. He attempts to explain it in a scientific way. You know, you can take that with however many grains of salt you wish, but he does explain his experiences very, very succinctly. So that's a great book for anybody beginning to want to have this kind of exploration in a conscious way.
I put that in the chat. I'm not sure whether he has 2 N's or 1 N in his name.
I think it's 1 N, William Buhlman, right?
Buhlman.
I think it's 1 N.
Yeah, Adventures Out of the Body. Yeah, that is a cool book. Buhlman has had a ton of out-of-body experiences. Cool. All right. What advice would you give? You're looking at a bunch of people in their 20s, or maybe even some folks who are 19. I'm not sure. Do we have any teenagers here? No teenagers? Are we 19 or 18? Okay, so we have some very young people here. Yeah, so we're just starting out. So what advice would you give to people here? I mean, having read that material and all that.
Since it's such an open-ended question, I will start with a very open-ended answer, and that is literally to follow your passion to the best of your ability. And to really, if you want to magnetize and manifest your dreams, your passion, your excitement, is that thread that tells you that you're translating what's coming from your non-physical self into your physical body. So passion is the translation by your physical body of your soul's energy telling you, move in this. Yes. And cut.
No, you're saying such great stuff that I don't want it to get lost. Passion is
the translation by your physical body of your non-physical self's energy. So that's indicating that you are truly in alignment with your highest self. And so this is a recipe essentially for becoming lucid in the physical life. And, you know, we often talk about how do we become lucid? And we haven't even unpacked how do lucid dreams and out-of-body states relate, of course. But the idea is that you want to become lucid in your physical life, and you'll notice that as you become more conscious within your physical life by translating more of your higher self's energy through physical action, by following on your passion, acting on your passion, then you begin to awaken to more of your soul's energy in the body. And as you do that, paradoxically, you will open yourself up more to spiritual experiences of lucidity in the non-physical as well. So they really do parallel themselves. So however you approach it, you can develop lucidity in the dream states and let that bleed into your physical life. Or you can awaken in your physical life through following your passion, or acting on your passion. Action is the important part. It's to act it out and to run that energy through your body of your non-physical self. And that helps you to awaken and become lucid in physical life, which then in turn bleeds into your nighttime experiences, and you become more lucid and awake therein as well. So that's it in a nutshell, is follow that thread of excitement. Follow those breadcrumbs of your intuition telling you, this is what really makes me come alive. And to act on that, passion, and to trust that things will unfold. Because each one of us comes in with a very specific gift to give. And if we're excited to give that gift, then there's somebody out there in the world that wants to receive that gift through us, because existence doesn't make mistakes. So what you're excited about sharing with the world and doing is there's somebody out there wanting to receive that gift from you specifically. And the way that you will give it can be given by nobody else in that same exact way. So just because there's 10 other people doing a similar thing, it doesn't matter. It matters that it's your passion, and you want to bring that, you want to manifest that through your action. So you're translating your soul's energy through you, through your body, which translates as passion into action, which then allows it to materialize in the physical. And that is the lucidity. That's the ability to create your life rather than feeling like you're a victim of outside circumstances. You become lucid and awake and realize that regardless of circumstances, you have a say in what's happening. You are lucid in your physical life. It becomes much more dreamlike in that sense.
Wow. I love that. Well, let me see, what else do I want to say? I think that's pretty much all the questions I had for you. I love the idea of passion. If I'm interested in, if I want to be a geologist, if I'm interested in rocks, which to me sounds pretty boring, frankly, but, I'm just excited about investigating rocks, then that's my passion, right? I mean, it doesn't matter what it is.
Absolutely. And, it's like some of the scientific minds, they tend to get very supported in our culture. But, if you're an artist, that can be less supported. It's getting a lot better these days. But the idea is that you want to trust that. But you also want to work within the belief framework that you're in. So, if you don't believe you have a parachute, you don't necessarily want to jump off the cliff and just all of a sudden, you want to honor where you are and just let the passion reveal to you that it can support you and that it can materialize for you and that it can open doorways for you. So you don't have to go from, being in one place to jumping off a cliff. You can let it gradually reveal, in the times that you have, follow that passion and let it flow through you. Let your mind acclimate to what that feels like. Let yourself experience what it feels like to have synchronicity line up for you and to things magically open for you. And you'll build up that trust in following that passion. So you don't have to make just a dramatic leap all of a sudden. It's a matter of you can go at your own pace and let it reveal to you that it can support you and that it is a loving universe and that you are meant to materialize your gift, which manifests as passion flowing through you. So it's, there's that aspect of it as well. Taking your time if you feel like that's what you need.
I was wondering if there's any of Seth's health and wellness that you apply to your practices with acupuncture and things like that. His teachings on health, sorry.
Oh, health. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very much, when I work with people, it's very much about helping them to understand the way their beliefs and the way they frame the world is translating eventually into the condition they're experiencing. Because to me, just relieving symptoms is frankly kind of boring. So I like to really dive in there and work with people who also want to dive in and see how can they shift their life to help alleviate whatever is getting blocked up in their body. So all pain is resistance to the natural self. So we're talking about the translation of passion into activity, into action, into manifesting your dreams in your life.
Tom, you throw some pearls out there, so I want you to slow it down a bit. You just said all pain
is resistance to the natural self.
Okay.
So the flip side of the coin is if you're not acting on your passion and you're not manifesting your dreams, you're probably experiencing constriction and pain in your body, because that's the indicator that you're not in alignment with yourself. So, and all this is, these are speaking in general terms. Of course, each person is very highly unique. Each soul curriculum is highly unique. So these are, general blanket statements, certainly not judgments about people. But the idea is when there is pain, there is some kind of resistance to that natural unfolding of the self. There's constriction. And usually that is, every time that is a negative belief about self and the world. So I can't follow my passion, or I'll never make it as an artist. Let's just say, as an example, the person's an accountant, and then they show up with, either severe neck pain or maybe anxiety, or, it's like how do you unpack that? It's like leading them to realize that, well, maybe, and these are scary questions to ask for some people. It's like, well, maybe I'm not in the right career. It's like we're talking about major life changes here. So it takes a person with courage to be willing to even ask those questions of like, maybe this pain is indicative of a shift in my life that I'm refusing to make, that maybe I need to work through whatever fears I have, whatever negative beliefs I have, so that I can allow more energy to flow through my body and manifest what I'm really made for, rather than doing what I think I'm supposed to be doing. So that really is, in a nutshell, I really work multidimensionally and multi-level, that, physical pain is always a reflection. It's a messenger letting you know that the energy is not flowing in a certain way. And when it's not flowing, it's like you ask the question, well, why? What's the blockage? And so mental constriction will eventually lead to energetic constriction, which will lead to physical constriction. And so you can reverse engineer it and begin to ask those deeper questions of, what does this pain indicate? If this pain was a messenger, what is it trying to communicate? Because there's no accidents, there's no random pains in the body, there's no such thing. Everything is a brilliant and beautiful orchestration. It's just a matter of decoding the messages that are in front of us, right in front of us in our body.
From Alondra, it says, what are ways of inducing OBEs and which have been the most effective?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And so what I like to use is what William Buhlman describes as the target technique. And, I kind of doubt he invented it, but he certainly popularized it. But the idea is to focus. So you go into a very relaxed state. It can be meditative, but reclining is more idyllic. And then you focus on yourself being in another place, a place that's very familiar to you, or you have a large affinity to, and you perceive yourself there, outside of, not, you're not in your physical body anymore, you're in your imagination. And through your imagination, you imagine, like, let's say you're laying down on your couch in the living room, and you're gonna imagine yourself standing in the kitchen and just really get into the feeling of it. And so while you're reclining and your physical body is going into a sleep-like state, your mind is very actively visualizing, in a sense, projecting yourself into the kitchen. And then you start to feel the sensation of what it's like to be there. So you're going to include your visual sense primarily, and your sensation, your sense of touch. So you want to pretend and feel like you're touching the cabinets, or you're picking up a mug, or you're feeling your feet on the floor. Visually, you want to be able to really see the detail of the cabinets, see the detail of the counters, and just really place yourself there as much as possible through the sensations, through your visualizations. And then you can even introduce the smell, the sensation of smell. What does your kitchen smell like? What does it sound like? Probably taste is the least of the ones you'll use, but the more of the senses that you recreate, the more you're actually training yourself to focus outside of the physical body, and you're sending a cue to your consciousness that you're ready to have this kind of experience. And then as you drift off to sleep on the couch or whatever reclining position you're in, sometimes I used to use an easy chair where you do the reclining position, and you're not fully. One of the tricks is you don't want to be fully like laying down like in your bed, because in our bed we tend to be programmed to want to go unconsciously into deep sleep and get rest. So often one of the techniques is to use a couch or use a reclining chair, and then to drift off to a sleep-like state with your mind maintaining active participation in the visualization of yourself in the other room or the other place. And that can be a powerful way. And, it's not like something that might happen right away. It might, but then it might take time. It might take time for your subconscious mind to begin to register the cues. So often people say, give it a good 30 days, give yourself plenty of time, do this regularly. And then, you'll have experiences, you'll have micro experiences. And then as you really focus on this, it'll just start to open that doorway, sometimes rapidly, sometimes it'll take time, sometimes it'll take 30 days of concerted focus before anything even begins to materialize. If you do read William Buhlman's book, you'll see how he he kept doing the exercises because he was very curious. And then eventually, like, his mind is just like all of a sudden like, wow, he has the experience. But it takes time, you know. It's not something you don't want to have insistence on a particular outcome. You want to actually just let it happen on its own, and you don't want to force the situation. Yeah, I saw something flashed across my screen as a question.
All right. Blanca asks, do dreams count as out-of-body experiences?
So there's a lot of ways to define this. So one way I like to use is that it's a kind of a gradation of consciousness, of your consciousness shifting. So when I say your consciousness, it's your physical like consciousness, the consciousness you perceive as yourself, is beginning to shift towards the dreaming experiences. And so as you bring more of your consciousness into the dreaming state, you have what we call lucid dreams. The next step is when you go from lucid dream to the full-blown out-of-body experiences, when you actually have the conscious recognition that you're no longer in your physical body, but you're in another vehicle of consciousness. I looked at my hands because that's usually the way I like to do it, is you look at your hands and then you look at your body and you realize, oh, this is not my physical. So boom, you just upgraded to the full recognition you're out of body. So that's what I define as an out-of-body experience. So that is the gradation of your consciousness, your so-called waking consciousness moving into the interior of the universe. Now, dreams often will be the translation of what your non-physical self had as an experience to the conscious self. So the dream is literally the, so to speak, the download of what your non-physical self is experiencing. It's translated as a dream. So dream is like a language, a translation of an experience. And then your physical mind receives that translation. So it's more that dreams are like the translation of experiences that your non-physical aspects of you are having to your physical self. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Sort of. Oh, good.
Mm-hmm.
With dreams, the problem with dreams is the language. It feels often difficult to interpret, you know, and you have a dream and you think, what does that mean? And so you need some skill to do that, I suppose.
And that's just a matter of becoming familiar with your symbols. So it's asking those questions, you know, what does the symbol represent? What does it feel like? First of all, the feelings will reveal a lot. We often go into mental definition, but the feeling actually reveals a lot. You know, is it a frightening symbol? Is it a welcoming symbol? Sometimes symbols that might for one person be frightening to another might be really kind of a different representation. You know, for me, for example, like when I see dark and ominous clouds in my dreams, that's not a foreboding of anything negative. For me, that's like the potential of the awesome display of power in nature. Because as a child, I used to love running out in the thunderstorms in the Midwest and just being awestruck by the incredible display of lightning and power and just the sheer force of nature. So that really touched me deeply. So when I experienced that in my dreams, that symbol means something different to me. Somebody else might interpret that in a different way. So dream books, you know, they can be sometimes helpful for interpreting maybe how a culture interprets symbols. But then again, it's highly personal to you. It depends. It's the mixing and blending of what you, as well as your so-called reincarnational selves or parallel selves, are having, because you might have symbols coming from Roman era times or from different time periods. So it's highly personal to you. So those dream books, just take them with a grain of salt that they are interpreting the symbols from a cultural context. So if you get a dream interpretation book from China, for example, it will be different than one from Germany versus one from the US, because there's just a different cultural context. There's the whole aspect of the 5 elements, you know, in the Asian cultures that you don't have necessarily in the West. It's going to be different. You know, the interpretation of a dragon across cultures is going to be very vastly different between European dragons and Chinese dragons, for example, Japanese dragons. Everyone's going to interpret that same symbol in a different way. So it's very important to get down to ask yourself, what does this symbol mean to me? we can take cues from the cultural definitions, but ultimately it's your symbol. And you can learn to decipher those symbols. You can, if it's your passion, that's the thing. If it's your passion, you will find a way to interpret those dreams. It's just a matter of acting on that, and eventually it will reveal itself. Like studying any language, this is a kind of multi-dimensional language, but it's a powerful study to learn one's dream symbols.
I presume that people can get in contact with you if they want.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Through my website, there's links. So that's Sumari Healing Arts. So it's a play on a Seth state of consciousness or family of consciousness. Sumari.
In fact, before we leave, I'll ask you about Sumari. We haven't even talked about Sumari in the group, but it's a fascinating development. Sumari. Type in. Yeah, well, would you like to explain what James' Sumari experience was?
Well, so for me, as I remember it, because I've read some of these descriptions years ago, but I got the sense that it's a family of consciousness that deals with initiating systems with new patterns of thought and development. So it's like setting off a spark of transformation. So some families of consciousness deal with stability, some deal with how to work with change that's already been initiated. Others, Sumari, from what I remember, was that initial spark that sets things in motion. It's the first domino that falls, so to speak. It's that first initial spark that sparks a massive wave of transformation. But different states of consciousness will deal with it at different levels, and then the last phase of it is the stabilization phase. So there's a family of consciousness that deals with stabilizing it into a structure. And then all these stages of development and growth of consciousness, but Sumari would be that initial spark, and that really sparked my passion, or because it was reflective of that. It's finding that spark of passion within and acting on it, and then that becomes the spark that sparks change within my own life. So it's a mirror reflection for myself and my own process.
All right. Okay, so we will say goodbye at this point, unless anybody has any final questions. Actually, we have all the time in the world, by the way, but we'll say goodbye here. And Tom, I've always been so appreciative of your ability to explain things, especially with regard to everything, really, but in terms of the Seth community, Seth material, and all these topics: dreams, lucidity, out of bodies, reincarnation, near-death experiences. I literally don't know anybody who expresses things as clearly as you do. Okay, everyone, take care, and all that is bless, and there's thank you, and thank you. All right, well, take care, guys.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor.